Okay, it looks like you're seeing my screen now. So welcome everybody. I'll do a little further introduction to myself at this point. So I'm Tim Mangan, Team Emerging Technologies. I'm based here in the United States, here in Boston, where we originally built that Softricity product. I was in charge of the engineering development team there when we built that product back in 2000 and 2001. But work with my own company, independent consultant. Mostly we're known for our training as well as our tools that we do on both AppV and MSIX. It's really great to be here with this particular group. I've been talking with Andreas and Sebastian for a couple of years about trying to get out to the group to talk with you folks, but of course I don't speak German, so there wasn't a chance of my doing this in the past. So at least something good came out of the pandemic, that we all get a chance to get together, because I'm just never going to learn German. I'm just way too old for that. But it's great to be here. I really look at this group as probably being the biggest AppV community in the world right now in terms of an organized fashion. And it's always good to get out and talk with customers that are actively using the products that are out there. What I'm going to talk to you about today are some best practices around packaging up, both for AppV and for MSIX, and kind of try to provide an overview of how that processing works and some of the options that are out there and available for you. As I talk with customers about what they're doing with applications, one of the things that I always want to stress with them is that while as packagers, we're always considered being all about the application, for our organizations, it's really not about the apps. All of the things that we're doing with packaging up these applications, delivering them in these constructs we call desktops, using all sorts of infrastructure and servers to deliver all of these applications out, are important, but all of those things are merely tools. For our organizations, computing is really all about the data. It's about getting all of those tools to make it possible so that the end users who come into work every day have the ability to work with data. They consume data, they create data, they manipulate data, and they distribute data. And we can really boil all of computing down into those four actions. So while individual applications and individual tools that we use might be important at the moment, part of what we need to keep in mind in our overall jobs as IT professionals responsible for getting these things done in our organizations is that it's not about those particular pieces, but it's about that end outcome and making sure that we can have the tools in place so that end users can be productive and get their job done with the least amount of disruption and worry. Okay, so let's start talking about AppV and MSIX. And anytime I start talking about AppV and MSIX, my mind immediately jumps to want to describe the differences between them. And in reality, they share an awful lot that's in common. So, for example, in both cases, we're going to be taking these applications and we're going to capture them in some type of tool. We're going to capture all of the things that the installer intended to do by writing into the file system and writing into the Windows registry, gather all those pieces up, and put them into a package that includes this other thing, which is the metadata for that package, the AppX manifest file. And for both AppV and MSIX, they have one of these things, and that metadata describes what should happen when that package gets deployed out on an end user system. So how will this application integrate with the operating system, integrate with the end user, integrate with other applications, and of course, integrate with data as well. And it's those major interface points are what really are being captured in that AppX manifest file. And that is the information being used to put out to the systems as we deploy that package. So I know that this is from the surveys, this is an audience that has a good amount of experience with AppV. So you're aware that when we capture our AppV package, there's probably an LNK file, which was the shortcut that the MSI or exe-based installer drop down on the system. And AppV includes that inside the package. It's one of the files in your file system, but it doesn't really even need to be there. Because what AppV sequencer is going to do is it's going to take the essence of that LNK file and it's going to add that information into the manifest file. And that's the information that's going to be used to push out that shortcut when we deploy the package. We see a very similar thing happening with MSIX, although MSIX actually deploys that shortcut out a little bit differently. So with AppV, it actually puts a real LNK file down on the system, not the one from your file system, but one it creates from the manifest. And it depends on whether or not we publish to the user or to the system. That depends where that thing goes. And that's independent of the way the original installer created that LNK file. But with MSIX, it doesn't actually drop an LNK file down. It integrates directly into the new Windows 10 Start menu as a way to provide that interface into the user, modernizing the application away from the way that it worked previously. So these are things that are all in common between these two technologies. And particularly when I start talking about MSIX, I like to talk about the capabilities of the packaging tool, the capabilities that's in the manifest, and the capabilities that's in the runtime of the operating system, because all of these things are actually a little bit independent from each other, and they're changing rapidly over time because MSIX is such a new technology. So as Microsoft rolls out new features and new capabilities of MSIX, we usually see them show up first in that middle piece, the manifest. So they'll extend the schema and we'll see that, oh, there's some new things coming along. But then we have to wait for the operating systems to implement those things. And that all organization needs to be on that runtime. So for example, when Windows Services became available in MSIX, you had to be on the 2004 or above version of the operating system to get that capability. And then, of course, there's also what the packaging tool generates, and that's usually the last piece to catch up with these new capabilities. So we kind of have to pay attention that we have all three of these pieces in place to make use of the new capabilities as we go forward. So let's talk about AppV and the processes that we usually talk about as the best practices to do packaging for AppV. And this will sort of set the stage for MSIX. The go-to tool for doing that is AppV sequencer that you get from the Windows ADK. And the process usually works as you drop this onto a clean machine that, you know, has a lot of background noise and things like that turned off. And we run the application installer, and then we configure that application, and we do all of the things to get that application ready so that when it's delivered to the end user, they don't have to worry about a lot of the setup. The application just shows up, it's configured for the way that your organization wants to work with that application. If there's backend servers that need to get configured, or more likely, you want to just disable the vendor's auto updater software. Those are things that we do as part of the packaging job to get that package ready. When we're done, the way that we usually end up working with this is we want to test that package rapidly. We don't want to necessarily involve all server backends to deploy a package. And so we use a free community tool of mine called AppV Manage. And so we just drop that on a machine that has the ability to take AppV packages. And we point it at a share, and we have it go ahead and add that package in and publish it out to the user, and we can test it. It has some debugging capabilities built in. And that's sort of been the process that we've used for quite a few years. And then in 2017, I started adding some new capabilities in terms of analyzing your AppV package, and really brought in a whole new process. So AppV Manage will not only help you deploy and test that package, but it'll also analyze your package, taking a look at the intent of the original application installer, because all those bits are still there in the package, and looking the way at your AppV package is formed. And so we can make some recommendations of changes to improve that package to make it a better package. Sometimes overcoming limitations in the AppV sequencer, and sometimes just improving the quality of the package. This may be an application that was built many years ago and maybe doesn't have all the bells and whistles that modern applications should have, like the ability for the end user to choose which application they want associated with a given file type association. If the application vendor didn't put in the type of application registration, we can add that to the package. And so what AppV would do is really produce a set of PowerShell scripts. But the process would be that you'd sequence it once, you'd go to AppV Manage, you'd see these things that need fixing up. You'd have to go back to the sequencer and repackage the application from scratch, install the application, configure it the way you did before, and then run this one extra PowerShell script while you're still in that monitoring mode to get all of those features back in. And so that's the process that we were using in 2017 as a way to improve the package quality. In 2018, another piece there is another free community tool of mine called the MSIX Manifest Editor. Now, this is a tool that you would really use at the end of sequencing in the AppV sequencer. So when you get into the sequence editor piece, that's that multi-tab interface at the end. You can go to the Advanced tab and export out your MSIX manifest file, and then open it up in this tool, which gives you a nice GUI to do the editing of that. So a lot of times, like, we'll package up and then we'll realize, oh, I should have gotten rid of the desktop shortcut. Well, rather than repackage it, we can come in with this tool, just go into the manifest editor, find the shortcut, and with a little checkbox, just turn it off and it'll take that shortcut out. Or maybe it's a file association, or maybe you left a service enabled and you want to disable the service and the Microsoft sequencer no longer allows us to disable services. Well, we can turn it off and set it into that disabled state right here in this tool. The other major use of that tool would be package scripting. So in the past, we were forced to do package scripting in the external deployment config and user config.xml files. When Microsoft opened up our ability to modify the manifest directly in the sequencer, well, we could now start putting the scripts directly in our AppV package. And that's really the way that I prefer to do all of my packaging. Many times we'll create the package and someone else is responsible for deploying the package. And if I have those scripts sitting in an external file, sometimes they get missed. And so if I put it inside the package, I can be sure it'll always get used no matter how somebody else deploys that package. So that's really kind of been the process that we were going through. In 2018, I also created a new tool which provided a new way to do this process. Now, this is an optional thing. This is the first time that you might have to pay for something to be able to do this, because TM-Edit is not a free community tool. It is a licensed one. But in this case, you'd use this good at, let it do the capture and all of the things that it does. But we would then go to this TM-Edit, which is a external AppV package editor. Now, it includes the same analysis that we see in AppV Manage, but instead of having to go out to PowerShell and back to the sequencer, it gives you the ability to fix the package right there. And so this makes for a smoother process, makes your job a lot easier. You don't keep having to go back to the sequencer to be able to fix up the package, particularly as you start doing testing and finding a few small things that you want to fix up. One of the things I've found with all of these techniques is that not only does it make my job easier, I'm actually end up producing higher quality packages that I'm deploying out to end users. And that's because as the process gets simpler and I don't have to go back to that sequencer, I'm more likely to fix the little things that are, I might let go if I have to spend another half hour to go back to the sequencer and repackage the app. But if I can just open it up quickly in a tool like this, fix it up and send it out, then I'm good to go. Those of you who've been with AppV in a long time know there's another product out there called the Application Virtualization Explorer, and that gives you the ability to do very similar things to this as well. And that's another option that's out there for you in terms of your process. There's also a number of other vendors that are out there, so you don't even need to use the AppV sequencer. When it comes to AppV, I think the AppV sequencer from Microsoft really is the best of breed go-to product. But if you're a company that's already doing a lot of application repackaging in MSI, and you may already own the products from these folks, in Flexera, that would be the Admin Studio. That's probably the most well-known product that's out there. But all of these folks have some great products for application packaging, originally intended for MSI in most cases, but they added support in for AppV. And now they've also added in support for MSIX going forward. So those are options for you. I think in the AppV world, we still consider the AppV sequencer to produce the best packages of any of these folks. But if you're already familiar with those tools and own them, they make a very good option as a way to create your packages as well. Now, as I start talking about MSIX, one of the first things I really need to talk about is this website here, m6conf.com. So that is a community site that I started when MSIX became viable a few years back. In addition to myself, you'll see some things on there from many of the other tool vendors that I was just talking about. So it's really a community space for folks to share information about MSIX. I think as the Microsoft community portal came online, the need for this particular site really kind of got reduced a little bit because we didn't have that Microsoft community site for MSIX when we first started this. But the one thing that really keeps this site going is the MSIX report cards. So this is a activity that I take on each year for the last 3 years, where sometime around at the end of January, I'll produce this report, which really kind of goes over where MSIX stands today. And so the latest of this came out in January, just a little over 3 months ago now. And one of the big key features in that report card is the testing that I do as part of it to take a look at where we stand in terms of application compatibility. So in those tests, I take a large number of applications that are typical enterprise applications, and I run them through the process of packaging them up using the Microsoft MSIX packaging tool, which is kind of our go-to tool, the equivalent of the AppV sequencer, and test those out and try to see whether or not these are applications that you are likely to want to deploy out in production. Now, we try to be as subjective as possible, but there's, objective as possible, but there's going to be some subjectiveness in any of this, right? You may see an application that you can package up and you can test, and the basic functionality is there, but there are a few things that are missing. And for some companies, those things are going to be really important and critical, and for other companies, they're not. So the chart that you see here, for example, on the left-hand side here, I'm showing a 31.4% compatibility, which is what I refer to as the full fidelity model. All right, so this is using the strictest criteria that anyone might use. And it's really saying, I've already deployed this application as an MSI or maybe through AppV, and end users are used to what they get with this application. So if I package it up in MSIX, do I get the same thing? Are there things missing that end users would miss and therefore be unhappy if I were now to deliver this to them in MSIX form? And so that green portion of the pie chart says that, yes, everything is 100% there. That little bluish gray section you see is there are a few things in there, might not be terribly important, but could be noticeable. And might be important to some people, right? So these might be some missing shell extensions, for example. And some companies are going to say, I don't care about the shell extensions. I'll go ahead and deploy it out anyway. But others will say, no, without that, I cannot use this product. I can't retrain my end users. I hear that so often from IT people. No, I can't do that. I can't retrain. We can't do training on users. I have to have 100% compatibility to be able to move forward. The yellow area is sort of the flip side of that. There are some things that I think most organizations would not want to deploy this application in this form, but some might. It might be a small missing piece of functionality, but the company doesn't really use that part of the application, so they don't care. The red and the black, of course, mean not at all. Now, I'm actually showing two different pie charts here, and the one on the left is the main piece. So with MSIX, MSIX provides a base level of functionality, but to get a higher level of compatibility, we need to bring in something called the Package Support Framework. So this is an open source framework that Microsoft created, and I'm a major contributor to try to improve the capabilities of our applications. And so the chart on the right shows the testing when we start bringing in the Package Support Framework, which we would typically have done using PSF tooling to make that happen. And I'll talk about that process here in just a minute. But to show you about the progress over time, I've got this chart that I also pulled out from the report to share with you. So as I said, I've been doing this for a while. We started testing against the 1809 version of the operating system. So this is when MSIX first came out. And at that time, quite frankly, although the PSF technically, it really wasn't usable to IT professionals. It was not available in any binary form. If you wanted to bring in the PSF in that time frame, you would have had to have gone to GitHub, download the source code, get a copy of Visual Studio, build your own copy, put the stuff yourself manually into the package, and do all the configuration. And that was just way more than any IT pro is ever going to want to do. So we didn't even bother with trying to test with the PSF during that first year. As you can see, a year later in 1909, the operating system capabilities improved a little bit, as well as the Microsoft packaging tool itself. So we got a little higher compatibility. But we also then had PSF tooling, and we were able to start bringing in the PSF and increase our application compatibility rating. So the numbers this year, without the PSF, we're now around the 30% mark. So again, additions into the operating system and the packaging tool. But I've also done a lot of work myself with the PSF this year, adding in new types of fixes and cleaning up some small issues that were in the existing fix-ups. And with that combined, a mark that's just under the 60% mark in this year's test. So each year, this is continuing to improve. My expectation is that when I run this test again next year, it's going to continue to improve, probably not quite at the rate we're seeing here, because I'm actually focusing on some other things that I'll be talking about to try to make things easier rather than better. So we'll take a little bit of pause, spend some time making the process easier for you, and then we'll go back to working on this compatibility and trying to get more and more of your applications to be really acceptable under MSIX. Now, I should say that with all this testing that I'm doing here, when we take a look at application compatibility, if you think about AppV, nobody really has a good hard number for what is the application compatibility with AppV. So if we look at the full range of that are out there, I hear some customers say numbers that is like 60%. And I have other customers that say it's like 95%. My own personal feeling is that it's probably about 90%. It depends on the customer and their mix of things. But most applications are fully deployable through AppV. The testing that I'm doing here is with applications that work, for the most part, really well with AppV. I actually do test all of these applications against AppV, and I come up with a number that's like 98%. But that's because I'm excluding applications that I know are just not going to work with AppV. And oh, by the way, the ones that don't work with AppV are not going to work with MSIX. So it's kind of a fair game to kind of throw all of those types of things out, things with device drivers. I'm actually also throwing out anything that's dealing with plugins to Internet Explorer. I don't include those in my test matrix because I know they're not going to work with MSIX. And I think we're getting to the point that people don't necessarily care about IE anymore. So it doesn't make sense to continue to keep them in there, even though you may be still deploying some of those applications today. All right, so let's take a look at the MSIX process and how we do this today using MSIX. So the equivalent of the AppV sequencer is called the Microsoft MSIX packaging tool. So this is, again, a free tool that you get from Microsoft. In this case, you would go to the Windows Store and download it from there. It's actually an MSIX package. And you would add that onto your system. As we do with the sequencer, we would just take their vendor installer, run it while we are in some type of monitoring mode. And then if we need the package support framework, this is where we would use my free community tool called PSF Tooling. PSF Tooling is also an MSIX package that you can get from the Microsoft Store for free. You can also now download it directly off my website. I get a lot of requests from customers. They don't want to go to the Microsoft Store. I really don't know how they're using it, how they're getting the Microsoft packaging tool, but they tell me they can't get access to the store. So I don't know, but I've made it available directly off the website as well. So this is a tool that is sort of a bolt-on. It's not the greatest solution as it is, but it gets the job done. So what we do is we install and configure the application, and then while we're still in monitoring mode, we fire up PSF Tooling. And PSF Tooling will take a look at everything the installer did and recommend some PSF fixes. And so you would select what fix-ups you need, inject them into the package. So it'll rewrite shortcuts and all of those types of things. And then let the packaging tool then finish its job and complete your MSIX package. So PSF tooling is able to catch probably about 2/3 to maybe 3/4 of the kinds of fixes that we need to add. It can only look at things that are static and were, files and registry things on the system. There are some things that applications do that we can only catch by running the application. So it's not really applicable to automatically find those things, but if you do find them, you can come back to the packaging tool, recapture your package, and ask to add those additional fix-ups in the package as well. To give an example of one of those, a lot of older applications, when they go to work with the Windows registry, they may have some information that's under HKey current user for some things that they've put in under their vendor key. And traditionally, under an MSI, the HKey current user key is completely wide open to the application. There's no special permissions needed, and it can do whatever it wants under that key. Well, under MSIX, it can't. It can read and write to those keys, but it can't ask for permission to be able to do things like delete a key or change ownership, things like that. And some of the older software will open up the registry keys just asking for full access because they've always been able to do that. And it's the simplest way for the developer to write that call. So they've just been doing that for years. And as you bring that package under MSIX, that won't work unless you use a new fix-up I created in the PSF called Reg Legacy Fix-Up, which can solve that problem for you by just changing the request from the application. So when the application asks for this full permission that we know it's not going to get, we just change it to a read-write permission, and now the application begins to work again. And it has all the capabilities it really needs. They're usually not wanting to delete those registry keys. They're just asking for the simplest access that they could to it. So we give them the access that they're allowed to have, and that usually solves the problem. So as of today, and I use this event as a way to announce this, I have a new tool and a new packaging process that we'll be able to start using going forward. So in this case, we'll use the Microsoft packaging tool and we'll install our application, but rather than use PSF tooling in the middle of the process, we'll go ahead and save that package off, and we'll let the packaging tool do what it's really good at, which is doing all of the capture of the pieces on the intent of the installer, capturing those files and registry items, creating your basic MSIX package, but then we'll run a new tool I have now called TM-Edit-X. And TM-Edit-X is a full-fledged MSIX package editor, standalone editor, similar to TM-Edit for AppV, but this case we're dealing with MSIX packages. But it also contains the type of analysis that I had in PSF tooling and all of those capabilities. So it'll still be able to look at all of the intent of the application installer, but it also has the opportunity to see what the Microsoft MSIX packaging tool has done. And in many cases, we can do a little better job than what was just in there. So for example, when I talked earlier about how MSIX changes over time, there are some things in the schema and are supported in the operating system that the packaging tool isn't supporting yet. So we can detect those things and recommend fixes to that and just give you a little button that you can click that'll fix up your MSIX package in addition to injecting the PSF and doing package cleanup operations and things like that that we typically like to do when we're packagers. As we do that, we can test and we can come back if we find like one of those runtime things that we still can't detect because you have to actually test the application to see those. We can come right back to this tool, open up the package and add those types of things in, and we don't have to go back and repackage the application. So this is really about simplification of the process. One of the big pieces of feedback that I get in our training classes as we train people to do packaging in AppV and MSIX is that, wow, I knew that there were some compatibility problems in going to MSIX, but I didn't think it was going to be this hard to get good packages working. We really need a simpler process. So this is an attempt at spending some time on simplification and making the process a little easier so that when I talk about that 60% application compatibility, that's 60% not that someone other than Tim can do, but that you can do yourself. And these are the kinds of things that we're going to need to do going forward to have a real viable process to be able to move towards MSIX. So one of the things that I do like to talk about with customers as they approach me about MSIX is, we're kind of where they are in that whole process. I do see a number of companies that come to me and say, hey, we saw these great demonstrations by Microsoft. We want to move to MSIX. I'm starting up a project for my team, and I'd like you to come in and train them because we're going to have this 6 to 9 month project where we're going to convert everything over, get it running in MSIX, and then we'll decommission our AppV stuff. And I just have to tell the customer no. They're just not going to be successful at that project. MSIX is not something we're going to do a big, huge, fast migration to. This is going to be a case where we want to walk and we want to learn. I do highly recommend that every customer start that journey, though. I think that that's really, really important. AppV is the best in breed product to deploy applications today in bulk. There is no doubt about that in my mind. But MSIX is the future of applications. I don't really have time here to talk about what Microsoft is doing on a developer front. But one of the things that we always wanted from day one with Softricity was to get application developers to deliver you software in the AppV format. Well, SoftGrid format originally, but then AppV later on. And even when Microsoft bought the company and they tried to encourage vendors to do that, they still really couldn't get vendors to do that. And that's one of the reasons for MSIX, is to create a new version of the platform, and one that not only can they deploy MSIX packages to enterprises, but is simple enough in that deployment side that they could also make it available to consumers. And they figured that doing that, they would be able to get the developers on board. It takes time to do that. I recall being on the Microsoft campus in 2001 for an event called Hailstorm, which was the release of the Microsoft .NET framework. So that was in 2001. It probably wasn't until 2005 or 2006 that we actually saw a lot of developers releasing their product .NET applications. It takes a while for that community to move forward. It will take a while to move forward with MSIX, but Microsoft is doing some great things kind of behind the scenes to give those developers a carrot to want to go. There's some whole stuff that they're doing with this thing called Project Reunion, which we really don't have time to get into. Really going to encourage those developers to, over a period of time, start releasing their software in that format. There are a couple of vendors that have MSIX products out there today. They also have MSI, so you have an option. But at some point, we're going to start seeing those applications, and your organization has to get ready for MSIX. And it's not just the repackaging stuff that I always end up dealing with. It's really the entire company focus. How are you going to deploy these applications? I think from a deployment standpoint, we're in really good shape with MSIX. Anything you can do with AppV or an MSI, you can deploy it with MSIX as well. That's terrific. But what about the other aspects? What happens when there's a help desk call? How does the help desk person determine, is this an MSIX app or is it something else? And how does that change their processes and what they're supposed to do? It's a really good idea to start taking some of the easy applications that you can deploy in MSIX and start that process today. Get yourself into that mode where you've got some things out there and you work through all of the organizational changes that need to happen in your company to be able to be successful at deploying MSIX, and not wait until you're under the gun, because at some point in the future, you're suddenly forced to understand what all of this MSIX stuff is all about. Okay. The other thing I like to also tell companies at the same time is their apps. A lot of what you see happening in all of my tools is little features in there to help you understand the apps themselves. So where are these apps trying to integrate with the operating system, with the end user, with other applications, and actually call them out? Because an IT pro usually don't have enough time to really get to know those apps. It's just something you got to package up and get done. So we try to make it easy for you to understand some of those interfaces as you are in process. And this becomes very helpful. So for example, when you take a look at the analysis that comes out of TM-Edit or TM-Edit-X, it'll tell you, oh, hey, by the way, did you know that there was an interface in this application that's a plug-in to Microsoft Word? You might not have known that. right? Oh, that should be part of your test. Oh, did you know that there's a shell extension for working with SharePoint? Well, is that part of your test plan for this application? Did you actually test it with SharePoint? That's the kind of information you need to learn about as you're in that packaging. But the other piece of that is you need to be thinking today, even though it's not part of any mandate within your organization, there should be a little bit of effort about the life cycle of applications. So if you've got something that's, say, like a Access 2000 database that you're still deploying today. I can't believe how many companies out there still have these things. They built it as an in-house thing 15 years ago. People still depend on it every single day. You know that thing is going to die someday. Somebody should be looking for those things and start talking about what's the plan to move that forward and modernize that and replace it with something that we're really going to be able to deploy 5 years from now, because you know eventually the clock is going to run out on those types of applications. So that needs to be part of the plan of what every IT organization is looking at as well. All right, with that, I'd like to say thank you. I'll be hanging out the rest of the day, and we'll be taking questions in the Q&A, and I'll try to answer anything you send my way. There's my contact information. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Tim. Maybe there are some questions, or we have some questions from the chat. Maybe you want to just go through it. Sure. I mean, let me just read what we have. Tim asking, Matt asking Tim, when do you see the success rate of packaging with MSIX to reach levels achievable with AppV? I think this will help improve adoption to this technology.
Yeah, I think it's going to take some time. So I said, I had numbers at 60% there. I don't think we've been jumping up at 20% per year. I don't think we'll hit 80% next year. I think we kind of have to hit that 80% mark before a lot of people are going to be really comfortable. But we're getting close to that. Even if you look at the lesser fidelity pieces, we were at almost 75%. So we're getting a little bit closer with that. What's the other thing I wanted? It triggered something else I wanted to say on that. So yeah, no, I think that's where we're at, and I think that for a while you're probably going to be doing a little. If you're doing AppV today, you're going to continue to do AppV. You'll augment it with MSIX, and then slowly over time we'll be able to get everything over. Now, do we get there next year? Is it the year after that? We'll have to see. Microsoft themselves does. There are limitations of what I can do. There are some fundamental things that Microsoft has to do, and we don't really have great information about exactly what their roadmap is. I know they're spending a lot of energy on MSIX and trying to get at these things, but we really don't know which of those we're going to see in the near future.
Okay, then there's another question from Xavier. What are the apps that typically aren't working, even with the PSF tooling, so red and black on your charts?
It's kind of hard to pin down what those are. Most of the things that aren't working, we really don't know why they're not working, so which makes them hard to categorize. But in general, I would say larger applications, applications that are trying to do things like work with some extra security permissions that you might need for something like taking pictures of the desktop and things like that. Those are a little problematic. Some of the COM-based stuff, largely if it's inside the package itself, all the COM-based stuff works okay. But as you try to expose things outside, COM objects that you expose outside, as well as those Windows services. So we can deploy services, but unlike AppV where they are inside the package, in MSIX, the services deployed externally. Well, those external components, and I think I also throw some of the shell extensions into this category too. They have access to the files they need, but they don't get access to the virtual registry. And that interferes with some of that. So it's a bit of integration problems that are the bigger issues we see right now. Although Microsoft has indicated that they're going to be providing us some better capabilities with kind of the equivalent of the AppV connection group going forward. We're not quite sure when we'll see that, But when that comes, that's going to make compatibility quite a bit easier. I have some ideas on that.
Okay, and there's another question from Anonymous. Why do we need to use so many external tools to create the MSIX package?
Maybe I should leave that for the Microsoft people to answer.
Yeah, we can take it for the Feed the Bird session.
Yeah, Microsoft has talked to me about whether or not they should include the PSF directly in the Microsoft packaging tool, so we don't need these external tools. But it seems like they're not going to waste their time doing that because they're more important things for their developers to work on, and we can kind of get the job done. Yeah, will they do it someday? I don't know.
Okay. There are two new questions. Is the PSF mandatory? Is using PSF mandatory?
No, it's not at all. So that when I had those two pie charts up, the one on the left was without the PSF. So that's where I was seeing in the high fidelity model about 31% app compatibility of what I was doing. And as software vendors start creating MSIX packages themselves, they're not going to need the PSF because they have access to the source code and they'll fix the things that are needed in the source code directly. So they probably won't be using the PSF. Some of them will still use it because they don't want to rewrite an older component and they'll just fix it up directly themselves, but they'll be taking care of that. You'll be getting an MSIX package, but the only thing that you need to do is figure out what customizations you want to make. And we do that through what's called a modification package. And we do just deploy those two pieces out and you're good to go. And when the vendor upgrades the application, you probably don't even have to touch that modification package. Your customizations will still be good to go with the updated version.
Okay. And then there's another one. When do you think we can create Visual Studio with MSIX?
Okay, I'm not as strong on developer questions, but I do know that there is a WAP, Windows Application Project, that is available in Visual Studio that will produce an MSIX package. I have played with it. Quite frankly, I find it a little bit lacking. It's your basic setup project. It doesn't really give you enough capabilities. The folks out at Advanced Installer have a free add-in to that you can use to create MSIX packages that I think is a little bit better, although you probably end up, if you go that route, you end up wanting to pay for their enterprise version to really do a decent package. Wix has support for MSIX as well. So you'll probably end up with third-party vendors, I'm guessing. It's sort of like the MSI, you know, you get the basic capabilities out of Microsoft, but if you really want to have all of the bells and whistles, you probably have to go to a partner to help you with that.
Okay, and the last one right now, is there a way to distribute MSIX like we can with AppV full infrastructure?
There is not a server per se to do that. I mean, in the end, it's just PowerShell, very much like AppV. There is a company called AppVantix, AppVantix. So they have something. So some of you have worked with the previous version of their product, which was under a different name. The guy had his own company, and then he's now working with these guys. But it has the ability to deploy AppV packages as well as MSIX packages. And of course, we also now have MSIX App Attach if you're on Windows Virtual Desktops. That's now gone GA last week. So that is a great way to deploy in there as well. I mean, I'm assuming you don't want to be doing you know, config-man or mem, so you have reasons to want to have deployment as a fast basis and in a non-persistent VDI or RDS type of scenario. So MSIX App Attach is the Microsoft way to do that with Windows Virtual Desktop, but we'll see other people using those same techniques and having products to do that in other environments as well.
Okay, and there's another one. Let me see. How well does MSIX work for multi-user session?
We have very little data on that, quite frankly. but it has all of the basic capabilities that AppV has, with one big exception, in that AppV does a lot of automatic fixing up of applications to make them multi-user aware when the developer didn't make them multi-user aware. So these would be the features in AppV, like object spoofing, object name spoofing. MSIX, for the most part, does not have anything like that. I actually have detected a little bit of object spoofing that they're doing, but it's not a general principle of I want to try to make these applications compatible to run in these environments. This is one of the differences in Microsoft's strategy with MSIX. AppV, although it didn't originally start out that way, turned out to be an app compat solution to many application problems for applications that were written for older generations of the operating system, and we're now trying to run them on new OSs. And so for a whole bunch of things like this, AppV just kind of automatically took care of all of that stuff for us. Another great example of that is when the application tries to write to an INI or an XML file in the program folder area, right? It uses that area for its configuration. With AppV, you didn't have to think about that. You just packaged it up. AppV took care of that problem. It said, oh, okay, I see what the application's doing. I'm just going to write it over here somewhere where it's nice and safe to do that. MSIX doesn't do that out of the box. That's one of the reasons we bring in the PSF to take care of those types of things. And that's pretty general with the strategy with Microsoft. They're not looking for MSIX to solve those application compatibility problems of older applications running in the newer environments. That's what the PSF is for.
Okay, good. Yeah, just another one. I think we take this one and then we move over to Andreas. It's saying, is MSIX meant to be available through that new software center like Kiosk, which will, or is it available with Azure?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes. Okay. Very good. I think everything else which comes, then we take it for our last session.
Perfect.
Also those Microsoft specific ones. So I would say let's hand over to Andreas for a short break. Thank you, Tim.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. Yes. I can start with the raffle if you like. I think we only need 5 minutes, and then we can